My name is Vespera Thorne, and on the night I turned 18, my older brother stole the entire £40,000 university fund our father had left me. He did not take it to pay for surgery, escape a dangerous debt, or save someone's life. He used it as the deposit on a house for his wife. I learned the truth when I came home from my shift at a local corner shop and heard him celebrating in our kitchen. "The transfer cleared this morning," he said. "Saffron can finally have the house she deserves." My mother told him to keep his voice down, but I had already stepped through the doorway. "What transfer?" I asked. Nobody answered. My brother slowly placed his phone face down on the table. My mother finally admitted that she had authorized the withdrawal because she was still listed as custodian on the account. She claimed I could attend a local technical college, work full-time, and figure things out. While my brother needed the money immediately to secure a 4-bedroom house in a better suburb, I stared at him and asked whether he had really taken the money Dad saved for my education. He shrugged. "You're 18. You'll survive." Then he said something that changed how I saw my entire family. He told me his wife's comfort mattered more than my unrealistic plans to study engineering. Less than an hour later, my suitcase was on the driveway. My house key had been taken from me, and my mother warned me not to return until I was ready to apologize. I spent my 18th birthday behind the wheel of my 1-2-year-old hatchback with £35 in my account. But years later, when my brother came begging me to save that same house, he had no idea that I already knew what he had done to get it. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? I want to see just how far Vespera's story travels. I had grown up in Manchester, England, in a narrow, semi-detached brick house where every decision seemed to revolve around my brother Julian. He was 6 years older, charming when he wanted something, and helpless whenever responsibility arrived. Our father, Arthur Thorne, had understood the pattern long before I did. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing plant and believed education was the only inheritance he could guarantee me. Before he died from a sudden heart condition, he placed £40,000 from his life insurance into a custodial education account. He made my mother promise that the money would be used only for tuition, textbooks, accommodation, or training connected to my future. At 15, I sat beside his hospital bed while he squeezed my hand and said, "Build a life nobody can take from you." I believe the account was protected. I did not know that my mother Jillian still had legal access until my 18th birthday. 3 weeks before that deadline, Julian and his wife Saffron found a newly renovated house they could not afford. Their mortgage application required a larger deposit because Julian had changed jobs twice and carried significant credit card debt. Instead of accepting that they were financially unprepared, Julian convinced our mother that my education could wait. By the time I discovered the transfer, the money had already moved through my mother's account and into a solicitor's client account. When I confronted them, Saffron did not look ashamed. She rested one hand over her stomach and said they were planning to start a family. "A child needs stability," she told me. I asked what an 1-8-year-old girl thrown onto the street needed. Julian laughed and said I was being dramatic. My mother insisted I was not homeless because I had a car. That sentence followed me for years. I packed 2 pairs of jeans, 4 shirts, my laptop, my father's watch, and the folder containing my university acceptance letter. I had earned admission to the University of Manchester's engineering program, but the initial fees and deposit were due within 10 days. Without the fund, I could not pay it. My mother stood at the doorway as I loaded my belongings. She did not hug me or ask where I would sleep. She simply said, "When you calm down, you'll understand why this was necessary." I looked past her at Julian, who was scrolling through photographs of his new kitchen, and realized none of them believed I would truly leave. They expected me to apologize, move back into my childhood bedroom, take out massive student loans in my own name, and eventually celebrate their new house, as if it had not been purchased with my future. Instead, I drove away. I parked behind the corner shop where I worked because the security camera made me feel safer. I pushed the passenger seat back, wrapped myself in my work jacket, and tried to sleep. Every passing headlight made me sit upright. Around 2:00 the morning, a police officer tapped on my window and told me I could not remain there overnight. I drove to a 4-hour gym car park, but an employee asked me to leave before sunrise. By 6, I had slept less than an hour. I washed my face in a petrol station restroom, tied back my hair, and reported for my morning shift as though nothing had happened. My manager complained that I looked tired. I apologized. That became my routine. During the day, I stocked shelves, rang up customers, and searched for affordable rooms in shared houses. At night, I rotated between hospital multi-stories, motorway services, and quiet residential streets, where I hoped nobody would notice me. I kept the acceptance letter in my glove compartment. Some nights, I opened it just to remind myself that before my family rewrote my future, someone had believed I belonged in university. I called the University Financial Support Office and explained that my education fund had been taken. The advisor was kind but direct. Emergency bursaries were limited. University accommodation was already fully booked, and private rentals required a UK-based guarantor with a clean credit history. My mother refused to sign anything. Julian blocked my number after I sent him a message demanding repayment. Saffron posted photographs online of herself holding paint samples beneath the caption, "Our forever home is finally happening." My money had purchased the herringbone flooring behind her. For 12 days, I lived on reduced to clear sandwiches from work and slept in my car while trying to create a plan. I considered giving up my engineering dream entirely. Then, a customer noticed the supply chain diagrams I had drawn on the back of discarded inventory sheets. She asked why a shop assistant was calculating delivery delays and shelf turnover. That question became the first opening in a door I had assumed was permanently closed. The woman who noticed my diagrams was Dr. Rosalind Bennett, a professor of industrial engineering at a local technical college. I recognized her name because I had attended one of her summer workshops 2 years earlier. She had taught us how small changes in warehouse layouts could save companies thousands of labor hours. While ringing up her coffee, I admitted that I had been accepted into an engineering program, but could no longer afford to attend. I avoided mentioning that I was living in my car. Rosalind studied me for several seconds and asked why I was calculating the store's deliveries. I explained that our milk arrived on Tuesdays, even though weekend demand emptied the cooler by Sunday night. Meanwhile, slow-selling energy drinks occupied almost twice the storage space they needed. I had started mapping the pattern because it bothered me to watch the same preventable problem repeat every week. Rosalind asked me to email her the diagrams. That afternoon, she replied with an invitation to meet. She helped me apply for a last-minute scholarship at the technical college, where she taught and arranged an interview for an overnight inventory position at Vance Logistics, a regional warehouse operated by her former student, Alastair Vance. The scholarship covered most of my tuition, but not housing. The warehouse job paid more than the corner shop and included access to an employee locker room with showers. To me, that sounded almost luxurious. Alastair hired me after I identified 3 inefficiencies during a tour of the facility. The first was a broken scanning process that forced workers to enter shipment numbers twice. The second was poor placement of high-volume products. The third was a scheduling gap that left loading bays empty during 1 hour and overcrowded the next. He warned me that noticing problems was easier than solving them. I told him I wanted the chance to prove I could do both. For the next year, I attended classes from 8:00 the morning until 2:00 the afternoon, worked at the warehouse from 4:00 the afternoon until midnight, and slept wherever I could. Rosalind eventually discovered that I was living in my car after she saw blankets and storage bins in the back seat. I expected pity. Instead, she gave me the number of a charity hostel for young women experiencing housing instability. The waiting list was long, but she called the director and helped me secure a temporary bed. The room contained 4 metal bunks and 1 shared dresser. To me, it felt like a palace, because the door locked and nobody could force me out in the middle of the night. I kept my living situation private at work. I wanted my ideas evaluated without anyone lowering expectations. At Vance Logistics, I began building a simple spreadsheet that predicted which products should be moved closer to the loading bays based on order frequency. Alistair allowed me to test the system in one section of the warehouse. Within 6 weeks, average picking time dropped by 11%. He paid me a small bonus and asked me to expand the system. I used part of the money to buy a refurbished computer, and the rest to make the first deposit on a rented room. It was in the basement of an elderly widow named Mrs. Carter, with one narrow window and pipes that rattled whenever someone upstairs used the sink. Still, it was mine. I placed my father's watch on the nightstand and taped my university acceptance letter above the desk, not as a symbol of failure, but as proof that one stolen opportunity did not have to become the final version of my life. Julian contacted me for the first time nearly 14 months after my birthday. He did not ask whether I was safe. He sent a photograph of the house and wrote, "You should come see what your contribution helped us build." I read the message twice because I could not believe he had used the word contribution. I replied that a contribution required consent. He accused me of holding a grudge and said our mother was heartbroken because I refused to attend family gatherings. Minutes later, Jillian called from a different number. She said Julian and Saffron wanted to put the past behind them. When I asked when they planned to repay the £40,000, she became angry. She argued that the house was now a family asset, and that I would benefit from it someday. I asked whether my name was on the title register at the land registry. She said it was not. I asked whether I was welcome to live there. She said Saffron needed privacy. I then asked how exactly the house benefited me. My mother went silent before saying money had made me cold. I ended the call. That night, instead of crying, I opened my computer and worked until sunrise on a better inventory model. Anger had once made me feel powerless. Now, I began converting it into focus. By the end of my second year, Vance Logistics operating costs had fallen enough that Alistair asked me to develop a version of my system for 2 additional warehouses. I did not yet understand that the program I was building after midnight would eventually be worth millions. I only knew that every line of code represented something my family could not withdraw, transfer, or sign away. I completed my higher national diploma with honors and transferred to a top university through an articulation program. Scholarships, employer tuition assistance, and the money I earned at Vance Logistics allowed me to continue without asking my family for help. I studied industrial engineering and computer science while refining the software that had started as a spreadsheet. The program analyzed order histories, staffing levels, traffic patterns, delivery windows, and storage locations. It then recommended how warehouses should position inventory and schedule workers. Large corporations already used expensive systems to perform similar tasks, but small and mid-sized distribution centers could not afford them. I saw an opportunity. Alistair saw one too. He offered me £4,000 and permission to test the program across all 4 Vance facilities in exchange for early access to the finished product. Rosalind connected me with a university business incubator that provided office space, legal guidance, and mentorship. I named the company Vertex Logic. My first office was a converted storage cupboard with no window and room for 2 folding chairs. I loved it. For the first time, I was creating something that belonged legally and completely to me. I invited 2 classmates to join the project, Priya Shah, a gifted programmer, and Caleb Morgan, who understood sales better than either of us. We worked nights and weekends while finishing our degrees. Our first paying customer was a family-owned medical supply distributor that had been losing thousands of pounds through late deliveries and misplaced inventory. We charged them only £600 a month because we desperately needed a testimonial. Within 4 months, their order errors dropped by 27%. They recommended us to 2 other businesses. Those referrals became 5 customers, then 12, then 30. Success did not arrive through one dramatic breakthrough. It came through missed meals, failed demonstrations, software crashes, rejected proposals, and mornings when I woke on the office floor with keyboard marks on my cheek. There were months when I paid my employees before paying myself. I drove the same aging hatchback I had slept in because replacing it felt less important than keeping the company alive. Whenever I doubted myself, I remembered Julian saying I would survive. He had meant it as a dismissal. I turned it into a promise. During those years, my family watched from a distance. My mother periodically sent messages about birthdays, holidays, or Julian's growing family. But every attempt at reconciliation came with a demand that I stop discussing the money. She wanted forgiveness without accountability. Julian became a regional sales representative, but his spending increased faster than his income. He and Saffron renovated the house repeatedly, financed 2 SUVs on personal contract purchase deals, and used credit cards for Mediterranean holidays they displayed online as evidence of success. From the outside, they appeared prosperous. Behind the photographs, they were borrowing against the house my university fund had helped purchase. I learned this through a cousin who assumed I already knew. Julian had remortgaged the property twice. He had also persuaded my mother to act as a guarantor for a further secured loan. The revelation did not surprise me. Julian had never treated the house as security. He treated it as a cash machine that produced more money whenever he wanted something. 3 years after launching Vertex Logic, we won a contract with a national supermarket distributor. To fulfill it, we needed more engineers, stronger servers, and capital we did not have. An investment firm offered £1.5 million for 40% of the company. The number was larger than anything I had imagined, but their contract would have allowed them to replace me as chief executive. I declined. Several advisors called the decision reckless. I remembered how it felt to lose control over the money meant for my future. I refused to build another future someone else could take through a signature. Instead, Alistair introduced me to several local business owners who invested smaller amounts under terms that allowed our founding team to retain control. The expansion nearly broke us. We missed deadlines, lost an important employee, and spent 6 months correcting a flaw that miscalculated staffing recommendations during bank holiday surges. I worked so relentlessly that Rosalind eventually locked my laptop in her office and ordered me to sleep. She reminded me that building a life nobody could take did not mean destroying myself in the process. Her words forced me to confront the part of my ambition that still came from fear. I was no longer sleeping in my car, but emotionally I continued living as though one mistake would send me back there. I began seeing a counselor, established boundaries around work, and learned that success built entirely from revenge could become another prison. That did not mean forgetting what happened. It meant refusing to let Julian remain the invisible manager of every decision I made. By the time I turned 26, Vertex Logic employed 73 people and served warehouses across the UK and Europe. A global logistics corporation offered to purchase a majority stake for £11 million, while allowing our existing team to continue operating the company. After months of negotiation, we accepted. My share after taxes made me a multi-millionaire. The morning the transaction closed, I sat alone in my office and looked at the balance on my screen. I expected triumph. Instead, I remembered being 18, washing my face in a petrol station restroom before work. I wished I could reach backward through time and tell that frightened girl she would make it. I also knew the news would eventually reach my family. What I did not expect was that Julian would call me less than 48 hours later. Julian's first call went unanswered. Then came a second, a third, and a message saying there was a family emergency. I assumed something had happened to our mother, so I called back. He answered immediately with a warmth he had not shown me in 8 years. "Little sister," he said. I heard the incredible news. He praised my intelligence, claimed he had always known I would succeed, and said, "Dad would be proud." I waited for the emergency. After several minutes, Julian explained that he and Saffron were facing a temporary financial problem. His company had eliminated his position, their variable mortgage rate had spiked, and several investments had failed to perform. The bank had issued a notice of seeking possession. Unless they paid £150,000 within 30 days, they would lose the house. The same house purchased partly with my stolen university fund was now in danger. Julian said our mother was devastated because she had guaranteed one of the loans and could lose her pension savings. Then he asked me to cover the amount. He called it a bridge loan between siblings. I asked what security he could offer. He sounded offended. "This is family," he said. I reminded him that family had not mattered when I was 18 and sleeping in a car. Julian claimed I had chosen to leave. According to his rewritten version of history, nobody had thrown me out. I had stormed away because I was stubborn. He insisted the £40,000 had not been stolen because our mother legally controlled the account. I asked whether legality and morality were the same thing. He avoided the question and told me Saffron was listening. She came onto the call and cried. She said their children should not suffer for decisions made before they were born. I agreed that the children were innocent. Then she said helping them would prove I had healed. That sentence revealed what they truly wanted. Not reconciliation, but a financial rescue that could be presented as my moral obligation. I told them I would review the situation only if they provided every document related to the original purchase, subsequent remortgaging, tax arrears, credit lines, and current possession proceedings. Julian resisted until I explained that no competent business owner would transfer 6 figures without understanding the liability. 3 days later, a disorganized stack of electronic files arrived. I sent them to my solicitor, Rachel Kim, and a forensic accountant named Owen Blake. What they found was worse than I expected. The original deposit had included the full £40,000 from my education account, but the documents described the money as a gift from our mother to Julian and Saffron. My mother had signed a gift letter falsely claiming the funds belonged to her and did not require repayment. More recently, Julian had submitted inflated income statements when applying for credit. He listed bonuses he had never earned and claimed ownership of a consultancy business that barely existed. My mother's signature appeared on loan documents connected to a secured line of credit exceeding £100,000. When Rachel asked whether Jillian understood the risk, I could not answer. There was also an unpaid council tax debt and evidence that Julian had transferred borrowed money into speculative cryptocurrency accounts. The house was not being lost because of one unfortunate layoff. It was collapsing under years of deception. Rachel warned me that repaying the arrears would not solve the underlying problem. Other creditors could still pursue the property. She also pointed out something important. Because the original £40,000 had been transferred through misrepresentation shortly before I reached adulthood, I might have grounds for a civil claim against my mother and brother. The statute of limitations issue was complicated, but recent written admissions from Julian could potentially support an action based on concealed fraud. I did not immediately decide to sue. Part of me still wanted to walk away and let the bank handle everything. Then my mother called and asked me to attend dinner at the house. Her voice was weak, and for the first time she admitted she was afraid. She said Julian had assured her the loans were temporary, and that his income would cover them. She claimed she had not understood how many documents she signed. I asked whether she understood the document that took my university fund. She began crying and said she had made a terrible mistake. I told her a mistake happened accidentally, transferring £40,000, signing a gift letter, and forcing me from home involved several deliberate choices. Jillian did not argue. She asked me to come anyway. I agreed, but before the dinner, I instructed Rachel to prepare a proposal. I was willing to prevent my mother from losing everything and protect Julian's children from immediate displacement. However, I would not hand Julian cash or erase his consequences. The solution would require him to surrender control of the asset he had stolen from me to obtain. 8 years earlier, Julian had assumed I was powerless because I had no money, no home, and no adult willing to defend me. This time, I would enter his house with a legal team, audited records, and the ability to decide whether it survived. The house looked exactly like Saffron's photographs: quartz worktops, bespoke cabinets, designer furniture, and a polished staircase above the entryway. What the pictures never showed were the final demands hidden in drawers or the loans attached to almost every renovation. My mother hugged me at the door. Julian stood behind her, wearing the tense smile of a salesman desperate to close a deal. Saffron had prepared an elaborate dinner and instructed the children to call me Aunt Vespera, though they barely knew me. I brought no gift and made no promises. After the children went upstairs, Julian began his presentation. He blamed his layoff, rising interest rates, and bad timing. According to him, £150,000 would stabilize everything. When I asked how he planned to repay me, he proposed monthly payments after securing another executive position. Owen's report showed he had never actually held one. I placed a folder on the table containing the debts, tax arrears, false income statements, and hidden transfers. Saffron accused me of invading their privacy. I reminded her they had sent me the records because they wanted my money. My mother stared at the figures in shock. The secured loan bearing her signature had grown beyond £110,000. Julian called it manageable. I asked about the non-existent consulting income he had reported to the lender. He called it an accounting error. I asked about the cryptocurrency transfers. He said they were investments for the family. Then I showed him a message he had sent a friend. I can double Mum's equity before anyone notices. Jillian covered her mouth. Julian demanded to know where I found it. Owen had discovered the message inside the files Julian provided. I told them I would not pay the overdue balance, offer a private loan, or leave my mother attached to their debt. I did, however, have a solution. A limited company under my control would negotiate an assisted sale with the lender and purchase the property. My mother's guaranteed debt would be settled through the transaction. Julian and Saffron could remain for 6 months under a formal tenancy agreement while they found affordable housing. In return, they would surrender ownership, acknowledge that my university fund had been taken without my consent, cooperate with the lender's investigation, and waive all future claims to the property. Any remaining recovery connected to the original £40,000 would be placed into junior ISAs, education trusts, for their children. Julian stared at me. "You want to steal my house? You used my future to buy it," I replied. "I'm offering you more mercy than you offered me." He shouted that the property belonged to his family. I asked whether I had been family while sleeping in my car. Saffron accused me of punishing the children. I pointed to the 6-month tenancy and the education trusts. "Your children are the only people here I'm protecting without conditions." Julian tore the proposal in half. He said he would find another investor, and no bank would sell his house to me. I explained that the lender had already reviewed our preliminary offer. Because repossession would be costly and the property carried several claims, the bank was willing to negotiate. He had 72 hours. My mother begged him to sign. Julian refused and ordered me out. Before standing, I placed another document on the table, a draft civil claim concerning the theft of my education fund. It had not been filed. I told him I preferred settlement over litigation, but I would no longer protect him from consequences. Julian accused me of blackmail. Rachel, joining by video call, explained that a lawful settlement offer was not blackmail. Then Julian made the mistake that destroyed the last sympathy I had for him. He looked at our mother and said she should take the blame because she had authorized the transfer. Jillian stared at him, finally seeing that he would sacrifice her just as easily as he had sacrificed me. She stood, walked to the counter, and signed the acknowledgement confirming that the £40,000 had been used for Julian's deposit without my consent. Julian called her a traitor. "No," she replied. "I became a traitor 8 years ago when I chose you over her." The next morning, Saffron contacted my solicitor privately. She had discovered 2 credit cards opened in her name and more than £30,000 in hidden debt. She agreed to cooperate if the 6-month tenancy remained available for her and the children. Within 3 days, Julian had no united defense. He signed. 6 weeks later, the lender approved the sale. My company acquired the property at a price reflecting its debt and legal complications. Jillian's exposure was reduced through a settlement partly funded by an investment account she sold. Julian and Saffron separated soon afterward. Saffron moved with the children into a smaller rental flat and found full-time work. Julian was investigated for mortgage fraud. He avoided prison through a plea agreement requiring restitution, probation, and strict financial reporting, but his professional reputation was ruined. I did not release the documents publicly. The truth reached the people who needed it: the bank, solicitors, regulators, and relatives he had manipulated. On the final day of his occupancy, Julian stood in the empty living room and asked whether taking the house made me feel powerful. "The house was never the point," I told him. "You mistook my vulnerability for permanent weakness." I had not returned to make him homeless. I had returned to stop him from using other people's futures to protect himself. When he handed me the keys, I remembered my mother taking mine on my 18th birthday. It did not feel like victory. It felt like the closing of a debt that had remained unpaid for 8 years. I never moved into Julian's house. Living there would have tied my future to the worst night of my past. Instead, I renovated it modestly and transferred it to a non-profit housing foundation I created with Rosalind and Alastair. The foundation provides temporary housing, transport support, and technical scholarships for young adults who lose family support while pursuing education or vocational training. We named it the Arthur Thorne Initiative after my father. The first floor became shared living space. The bedrooms housed young women between 18 and 24, and the garage became a computer lab. The dining room where Julian once asked me for £150,000 became a classroom for budgeting, coding, and tenancy rights. I did not erase what had happened in that house. I changed what the house was allowed to mean. The first resident was a 19-year-old nursing student whose parents had expelled her after she rejected the career they chose for her. Another was a warehouse employee studying electrical engineering at night. When I saw their acceptance letters taped above their desks, I remembered the letter I once taped above my basement bed. That was when I understood what turning the tables truly meant. It was not watching Julian lose ownership. It was transforming a house built with stolen opportunity into a source of opportunity for others. My relationship with my mother remains complicated. Jillian entered counseling, sold her home, and moved into a flat she could afford without help. She apologized without demanding immediate forgiveness and stopped defending Julian. Eventually, she began volunteering at the foundation. I allowed it, but I did not let her guilt become the center of my healing. We meet occasionally. Some conversations are warm, others remain uncomfortable. Forgiveness, I learned, is not a door that opens once and stays open. It is a boundary you evaluate repeatedly. I forgave my mother enough to stop carrying her choices inside me. I did not restore the trust she once had. Julian and I have almost no relationship. During probation, he worked for an equipment hire company and lived in a modest flat. For a while, he sent messages accusing me of ruining his life. I answered only once. I told him losing a house he could not afford was not the same as losing a life. His children still had housing, education trusts, and 2 parents who loved them. At 18, I had received none of those protections from him. Saffron completed financial literacy courses and began rebuilding her credit. We are not friends, but she sends yearly statements confirming the children's junior ISAs remain untouched. I value that more than any apology. Vertex Logic continued growing. I remained chief executive for 3 more years before moving into a board role. The company now helps hundreds of mid-sized businesses reduce waste, improve delivery systems, and create safer warehouse schedules. I also invest in founders with strong ideas but no wealthy families or powerful connections. Whenever possible, I ask them the same question Rosalind once asked me. What problem do you notice that everyone else has accepted? I still own the old hatchback I slept in. It no longer runs, but I keep it inside the foundation's training center, not as a trophy. And not to suggest suffering automatically creates success. Many people endure hardship without receiving the mentorship, opportunity, or luck that helped me. I keep the car because survival should never be romanticized. No 8-year-old should have to sleep in a vehicle to prove determination. No parent should call a car a home simply to excuse abandoning a child. My success does not make what happened acceptable. It gives me the resources to stop it from happening to someone else. I no longer define revenge as destroying the people who hurt me. Destruction would have been easy once I had money, evidence, and power. The harder task was using those things without becoming cruel. I could have allowed the repossession, sued everyone publicly, or exposed every humiliating detail online. That might have earned applause, but it would also have harmed children who had no part in stealing my fund. Real power was designing consequences carefully. Julian lost the house, his access to easy credit, his false professional image, and his ability to manipulate our mother's finances. My mother had to acknowledge what she had done and rebuild her life honestly. Saffron was forced to confront the cost of ignoring obvious warning signs. The children received protection instead of punishment. And I recovered something more valuable than £40,000, the right to define my own story. My father once told me to build a life nobody could take from me. For years, I thought he meant money, property, or professional success. Now, I understand he meant judgment, knowledge, self-respect, and the courage to leave systems that survive by exploiting your obedience. Money gave me options when I returned to that house. Education helped me recognize them. Mentorship gave me access to them. Boundaries gave me the strength to use them. So here is the lesson I would share with anyone whose family treats loyalty as permission to exploit them. Being related to someone does not give them ownership of your future. Helping family should come from consent, not coercion. Sacrifice has meaning only when the person making it is allowed to choose. You may forgive without restoring access. You may care about someone without financing their irresponsibility. You may protect innocent relatives while still holding the person who harmed you accountable. Sometimes the strongest response is not taking back exactly what was stolen. It is building something larger, safer, and more useful in its place. On my 18th birthday, I lost £40,000, my home, and the belief that my family would always protect me. Years later, I gained a company, financial independence, a community, and the power to protect young people facing the same betrayal. Julian believed he had taken my only path forward. In reality, he forced me to discover that my future had never existed inside one bank account. It existed in what I could learn, what I could build, and what I refused to surrender. Sometimes everything changes because someone returns for revenge. In my case, everything changed because I returned with evidence, boundaries, and a better purpose for the house they bought with my stolen dream. We appreciate every viewer who stayed on to define a moment. All situations in the story are visionary and created only for educational and entertainment purposes. We hope it reminds you that when someone only respects you after facing consequences, that respect may have arrived too late to deserve another chance. Real change is shown through consistent actions, not temporary regret when someone realizes they can no longer benefit from your patience.